determine that all of the descendants of refugees are eligible for that characterization. What do we do with UNRWA, and how should we deal with the issue of Palestinians who remain in refugee status, as well as the unborn generations to come? We are extremely fortunate to have with us today two distinguished guests to share their perspectives on the challenging issue. Dr. Einat Wilf served in the 18th Knesset as chair of the Education, Sports, and Culture Committee and chair of the Subcommittee for Israel and the Jewish People. She previously served as a foreign policy advisor to then Vice Prime Minister Shimon Peres and currently serves as a senior fellow with the Jewish People Policy Planning Institute. Middle East analyst Dr. Asaf Romirowsky is an adjunct scholar at the Middle East Forum and the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies. He is a former IDF International Relations Liaison Officer in the West Bank and to the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan. Both panelists have written extensively on UNRWA. Our moderator, Leah Odeneh, is the Assistant Director of Policy and Government Affairs at AIPAC, where she has worked for more than a decade closely monitoring Palestinian issues and the United Nations, including UNRWA. I'll hand this over to Leah to kick off our discussion.
Thank you so much, Max. We're really fortunate to have both of you here today. As Max said, UNRWA was created by the General Assembly to deal with the humanitarian needs of Palestinian refugees. As a creation of the General Assembly, it is the GA, the UNGA, that gives UNRWA its mission. Today, UNRWA and its mandate are deeply flawed. But rather than contribute to resolving the Palestinian refugee issue, UNRWA has evolved into an agency that perpetuates it and even exacerbates it. Still, it's important to recognize that criticism aside, UNRWA provides vital humanitarian assistance to Palestinians in Syria, Lebanon, Jordan, the West Bank, and Gaza, which is why both Israel and the U.S. cooperate with them. If UNRWA were not providing these services, responsibility to meet these humanitarian needs would fall on others. The extreme instability and unrest in the region even further complicate this already extraordinarily complex issue. To help us understand, we are so fortunate that both of you are with us, and I'm going to turn the floor over to you, Einat, and ask what you feel is the best way to deal with UNRWA.
Short answer or long speech?
A long speech. You tell us.
So first of all, thank you, and I want to commend you for having a session on this issue in the conference. For all you participants here, I think you should think of yourselves a bit like participants who perhaps attended a discussion on Iran's nuclear program 15 years ago, and it was perhaps a small, marginal issue that no one took seriously, and through the persistence and perseverance of many people, it ultimately made it to center stage where it should be. And I certainly believe that we have a role and that you have a role, which hopefully you will take upon yourselves after this session, to bring to the attention of the various countries that today support UNRWA financially, primarily the United States, to the tune of $250 million a year, and the European Union and various European countries to over $500 million a year, to bring to their attention that what they might think of as a humanitarian effort, a do-good effort, is actually perpetuating the conflict between Israel and the Palestinians and undermining the very cause that they claim to uphold, which is a resolution of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict by means of a two-state solution. And this is really how I came about to accept that, you might not accept it, but at least you understand the logic of why a country that supports a two-state solution says, let's not expand this kind of activity. Even the support for a Palestinian state in the UN was done by many countries because somehow they thought that this would be a step, and I'm talking about countries of goodwill, I'm not talking of countries that have a proven history of ill will towards Israel, but many countries of goodwill supported Palestine's bid in the UN, again thinking that this would be a way of securing, helping, ensuring a two-state solution. And yet, there's this huge issue that everyone turns a blind eye to. And it is working in exactly the opposite direction that the countries of the West seem to want. They seem to support a two-state solution. This is the official policy of the United States and of Europe. It underpins everything they say about how they treat Israel, how they treat the Palestinians. And yet, they fund with $1 billion a year an organization that, while it does good, in terms of its very ideology and ideas and the way it operates, undermines the possibility of any solution to the conflict in the future. And how does it do it? What essentially is being done is that under the guise of an agency that helps Palestinian refugees, Unrwa has decided on its own, mind you, that every descendant of refugee shall be called a refugee as well. If this were not the case, the number of refugees from the war on the Arab side would today be probably several tens of thousands. The estimates are that the original numbers of those who fled, were forced to flee, was around between 600 to 800,000. There are various estimates. Today, alive, there would be several tens of thousands. Now, imagine what would happen to negotiations on a two-state solution if the numbers that we would be talking about of they, as a result, should expect to one day return there. Now, clearly, if this is an expectation that is being supported by the West, it means that the West does not truly support a two-state solution. Because the partition resolution talked about a Jewish state and an Arab state. And if you seek to have an influx of 5 million Arabs into a state that today is home to about 6 million Jews and 1.5 to 2 million Arabs, you clearly do not support the notion of self-determination for the Jewish people. And this is why this policy cannot, at the same time, stand with the idea of a two-state solution. And I personally find it amazing that it is just not treated, not addressed. Think how much public attention there is on the issue of settlements as a hindrance to a two-state solution, and compare that to how much there is on the expansion of refugees. And I think these are exact parallels. Because if the policy of the US government and Europe on settlements were the same policy that it has today on refugees, it would look as follows. It would be as if they would say to Israel, Israel, you know what? Go ahead and build as many settlements as you want. We recognize that this is disputed territory. This is a final status issue. So go ahead and build. Until there's an agreement, we'll stand aside. Go ahead and build. Don't tell the settlers that they will ever have to leave their homes. Let them believe that this is their place and they can stay there. We will even be happy to fund this and give $250 million a year to your building of the settlements. And we trust you that when the day comes to negotiate a final agreement with the Arabs, you will do so in good faith and in a way that ensures a proper independent state for them. Now, I can tell you that all governments in the West would think this is crazy. But this is precisely the policy that they have when it comes to the issue of the descendants of the refugees. They're essentially telling the Arabs in Gaza and West Bank and Jordan, keep creating new refugees from an old war. Expand their number in perpetuity. Don't ever tell them that they will not return to a place where they never came from. Keep helping them believe that actually what today's Israel is their own. We will fund this to the tune of US and Europe together and other countries $1 billion a year. And we trust you that when the day comes to negotiate a final agreement with the Jewish state, you will do so in good faith and in a way that ensures the integrity of the homeland of the Jewish people. This is the current policy of the West on this issue. And it is just as crazy as what I said before, and it makes no sense for a country that claims to support a two-state solution to also keep supporting the perpetuation of refugee status over generations. Now, the thing is also that when we talk about refugees, most people, with all due respect, do not engage in the minute details of the conflict. So when they hear that there are 5 million refugees from Palestine, this is the image they have in mind. First of all, they assume that they're all recent refugees from a war that just raged. They imagine 5 million people huddled in leaky tents on the borders who have just been kind of ousted from their homes. They don't imagine middle-class families in Ramallah. And as a recent European official who worked on this issue and was actually the European representative on the Unrwa issue, he said, and I know these middle-class families very well. So we talk about humanitarian assistance, we talk about refugees, but even these words are misleading. The people who are required and gets citizenship by a third country is no longer a refugee. No. They continue to be called refugees. So 4 million out of the 5 million are essentially not refugees by any standard. They're living either in their own embryonic state or in a state that has given them citizenship. The remaining 20% are pretty much divided 10% Lebanon, 10% Syria. And here, by the way, the issue is that the Arab countries, even though these are Lebanese-born people and Syrian-born people, refuse to give them citizenship because they know that if they gave them citizenship, this would help alleviate and end the conflict with Israel. We are seeing this even now. Some of the descendants living in Syria wanted to escape to Gaza as a result of the problems in Syria. Israel was willing to let them come in, but with the understanding that that's it. They're coming into their own place. No. The Hamas in Gaza refused to help their brethren if that meant that they would relinquish the idea of returning to Israel. This just shows you that at the end of the day, this is a political effort to perpetuate a conflict under the humanitarian gods. So a lot of humanitarian work is being done, but it's a fraction of the political work that is being done, and the political damage is far greater than the humanitarian assistance that is being done, which is why I've committed myself as a member of Knesset, and now beyond that, to bring this issue to the attention of the donor countries. By the way, I'm not asking anything of the Palestinians. As far as I'm concerned, they can continue dreaming of the disappearance of Israel, its destruction, and return to their own homes. I'm not asking them to give up their dream. I'm just asking the Western countries who fund the organization to be consistent with their official policy of a two-state solution and to expose the internal contradiction of the fact that they support a two-state solution but fund a political idea that undermines it. And again, I will end by commending you for having this session, because hopefully if we do our work right and you decide to join, I'll also mention that at 4:30 in room 302, I'll repeat it later, we're holding a session for anyone who wants to be active on this effort of convincing their countries, that are donor countries, to begin to put this issue in the agenda as something that runs contrary to the official policy of a two-state solution. Thank you. Asaf?
Well, first of all, I too want to commend everybody for coming today and talking about this issue, and AIPAC for arranging this. I think it's a very important issue that needs to be addressed. And obviously, I commend Einat's work on these very critical issues. I've devoted over a decade of my research to dealing with the Unrwa issue over the past over 10 years, and I don't have any key disagreements with Einat's view of this, but I think there's a larger issue that needs to be understood when we're looking at really Unrwa's functionality and what Unrwa actually does. It's important to also understand that one of the major functions of Unrwa today is Unrwa is the largest employer of Palestinians.
I'll tell you what, if you record it, I'll send you a copy.
30,000 individuals that are employed by between 25 and 30,000 Palestinians who are working for Unrwa. So there's also a question about Unrwa's integrity as a UN agency when it employs so many Palestinians, and the question about whether or not it has much oversight as to the functions and the work that Unrwa does. When Unrwa was first created, if you look historically, Unrwa was actually did try to stay true to its original mandate, that is to become a real facilitating the integration of Palestinians, in Palestine to move along an agenda. And they tried to stay kind of neutral and middle ground. What happened was they realized that if they're not going to become a true advocate of the Palestinians, then they're also not going to get funding from the Arab world. So the big kind of shift that took place historically when you look at the Unrwa issue took place actually in the aftermath and leading up to the Six-Day War, where the Arab world basically agreed that, or, in large contributions, that if Unrwa becomes a true advocate of the Palestinian cause, then they will compensate them with large amounts of money. It's important to understand also that Unrwa that was created as a temporary organization that really has, unfortunately, no real end date. The ultimate, the official record of Unrwa is that when there is resolution to the Arab-Israeli conflict, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict per se, then Unrwa will cease to exist. Going to Einat's comments about trying to create a two-state solution, but if they're increasing the numbers and the numbers continue to inflate, then obviously you're not seeing that ever coming to an end. So the numbers continue to grow, and Unrwa continues to exist. But when you look at how the monies kept on trickling into Unrwa and how Unrwa was continued to be funded by the Arab world, basically the agreement was, or the understanding within the Arab narrative, that as long as first of all, the creation of Palestinian refugees and Arab refugees to begin with is at the fault of the West and of Israel. As such, it's their problem to solve that problem. What we are going to do is help fund and help try to alleviate that. We're not going to take them in as citizens, with the exception of Jordan. We should commend Jordan as being the only Arab country who's taken in Palestinians and has given them citizenship. The rest of the Arab world basically gives monetary contributions to say that this is our way of trying to alleviate the problem. The solution for the refugees is only in what is considered to be today Israel, or what the Arab world perceives to be as the quest for Palestine in place of Israel. So in the aftermath of the Six-Day War, monies continued to trickle in, and monies came in large amounts as a result of becoming a full-fledged advocate of the Palestinian cause. Hence, you also have a great deal of employment by Unrwa for Palestinians. What it is also created as a result of being the largest employer of Palestinians is really who is determining the agenda of what Unrwa does. How is it that, one should ask the question, that the clientele of the organization itself has actually basically taken over the agenda of the organization? The majority of Unrwa are Palestinians, whereas the internationals that are coming in are the ones that are being indoctrinated for the Palestinian cause. If they don't get on that agenda, they're not really going to stay in office for a very long time. Case in point, one of the former chief legal officers of Gaza, James Lindsay, published a report about Unrwa a few years ago about how to fix Unrwa. He questioned really what Unrwa is doing from a legal status. I mean, again, there is a lot of, he acknowledged that there are a lot of problems, but he also acknowledged the issue that is really critical, that most of the Palestinians who are living, and it goes back to Einat's point, are actually already integrated within their societies. They're already living in middle class, they're not living in these refugee issues, and really questioning the clientele of Unrwa at large about really what Unrwa is actually doing, and really who are these people that they're really serving. Which really leads to the ultimate question of who is actually a refugee, which is has become the raison d'etre of Unrwa at large. Unrwa's entire existence is dependent on the fact that there are refugees. As long as there are refugees, Unrwa will continue to exist. So Unrwa has a self-perpetuating interest in the existence of refugees. And so there is no incentive to actually create this movement towards solving the problem. And that is the fact that the ultimate mandate was to reintegrate, reassimilate within a society. And that has not happened. It has basically become a microcosm of Palestinian society that basically allows Palestinians to say that as long as we are refugees, we are going to continue to exist and we're going to continue to perpetuate the conflict.
it's also critical to understand when one dives into or looks into Palestinian identity, is the fact that Palestinian refugees have basically become a symbol of Palestinian identity. That's why, for example, when Mahmoud Abbas went to the UN and asked for Palestinian status, now that we have this embryonic state of Palestine, he said, I want a Palestinian state tomorrow, but I'm never willing to give up the right of return. Right of return connotes the existence of the fact that we are refugees, and the fact that we are always going to be refugees, and as long as we're refugees, then the problem is not going away. The refugee symbol, which is really where UNRWA has gained a lot of credibility, has unfortunately been used and abused by the Arab world as a symbol of what Israel and what the West have done to the Palestinian refugees. So you have had leaders stemming from Nasser all the way to bin Laden in his day saying we're never going to stop the quest for our cause until the Palestinian refugees are going to be resolved, until we solve the Palestinian refugees. This has become, unfortunately, a mechanism without actually willing to take any kind of responsibility to actually work towards assimilation and taking in the Palestinian refugees. That is a fundamental issue that needs to be understood. Furthermore, I think it's critical to understand, as we're talking, really ties in a little bit into Einat's comments about the future of the two-state solution and Palestinian statehood. It's important to understand, I think, that there's also an issue of the kind of services that UNRWA provides, ranging from education to health services to social needs and whatnot. If we're talking about a state coming to fruition, if we're talking about a functioning state, those services should be the services of the Palestinian Authority, not UNRWA. What is happening today is basically that you're seeing essentially double dipping of monies, whereas the same services that UNRWA provides are Palestinian Authority services. So you have this kind of reciprocity that exists between the Palestinian Authority and UNRWA, where they're getting two sets of money for the same kind of services. What this is, again, not helping move along towards a functioning Palestinian state when a non-governmental organization is really the one calling the shots. This really is another critical aspect to understand when you're looking at UNRWA, is that in comparison to other UN organizations, and this is where I think that there is, they've crossed the line, is really UNRWA's political involvement. If you compare UNRWA, for example, to its sister organization, the UNHCR, the UN High Commission of Refugees, if you look at the mandate of such other refugee organizations, and specifically UNHCR, the mandate was not to get involved in political entities at all. UNRWA has basically immersed himself in Palestinian society, where it has become a full-fledged advocate of the Palestinian cause, and I would even argue that it has become, to some extent, a shadow government for the Palestinian Authority. If you look at most of the ministers within the Palestinian Authority, and if you poll Palestinians, you will rarely find a Palestinian who would argue that I disagree or dislike UNRWA services. The fact of the matter is that most Palestinians are graduate of the UNRWA schools, and so they know UNRWA to be the provider of this kind of education. But if Palestinian society is to move along, then they have to, and I'm talking about us in the West and even in the state of Israel as well, and I would even argue the Palestinians themselves, if they are really looking forward to have an actual Palestinian state, should want to break the monopoly that UNRWA has over their society. There's going to be a movement towards an actual state that would be functioning and not being governed by an outside provider. That is another element that we need to understand. The political matrix that UNRWA has created, where you have UNRWA schools, and you have Palestinian Authority officials who are alumni of UNRWA schools, and the fact that UNRWA is become this shadow government for the Palestinian Authority is not helping us resolve these problems. The other aspect, of course, as I was mentioning before, is the element of Palestinian identity. Palestinian identity is inherently rooted in three issues, and one of them is, of course, the fact that we are all refugees. The responsibility of the refugees is the West and Israel, and we're never going to stop until there is resolution for the refugee problem. Those are the kind of the three elements that comprise Palestinian identity. And all of that comes to fruition by an existence of a UN body, Unrwa, that ensures the fact that that Palestinian refugees will be refugees forever. The financial and the monetary concerns that, if we're looking at us from the West, what we should be concerned about is really where is Unrwa money going? What is it actually funding? Today and currently, when Unrwa asks for money from Congress and when Unrwa asks for money from other European countries, basically all Unrwa has to do is make the argument in one line or two that basically they take care of the betterment of Palestinian society. And if you care about Palestinian refugees, if you care about the fact that there should be resolved, all you have to do is write us a large check. And I would argue that that is problematic given a lot of the issues that Unrwa has been involved in, ranging, and we can talk about that a little bit later, about the kind of education that's coming out of the Unrwa schools, the kind of involvement that Unrwa has been involved in with some tainted money, where it's going as far as involvement with the other elements within Palestinian society, ranging from Hamas, the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, and other organizations. And we should be concerned also about looking for some kind of accountability of the kind of works that Unrwa does. All we have to do is look to our friends in the north, Canada, that recently was the first Western country to defund from Unrwa. And the reason they decided to defund their monies from Unrwa because they could not get any kind of accountability about where their monies are going. It's not to say they're not willing to fund projects in the Palestinian Authority, but they said, with Unrwa, we don't get that kind of measurement of accountability. So what they said was, we're willing to fund projects of the Palestinian Authority, which is the governmental body that is supposed to take care of the Palestinians and the Palestinian state to be, and that's what we'll see some kind of accountability and measurements. And interestingly enough, the impetus for Canada's actions was based on a EU report that came out of a Taxpayers Alliance looking at the kind of education that Unrwa has been teaching its children, that had incitement towards violence, martyrdom, jihadism, shahidism. These are problematic issues in the sense of building a functioning society that also ties into the issue of the creation of a two-state solution where you have peaceful neighbors living side by side, which is based on mutual recognition, not based on martyrdom, shahidism, and the kind of rhetoric that has been coming out, unfortunately, out of some of these schools. All in all, we should be, if we care about this major issue, which has become a significant issue, and I don't disagree with Einat at all about the centrality of this issue between the comparison between the settlements and the right of return. I think if anybody here in the room, and I'm sure everybody obviously cares about these matters at large, and you're here, if you look at the Arab-Israeli conflict at large, you could basically boil it down to three issues, and it's been Jerusalem, the right of return, and 67 borders. Of all the three issues, it is really the right of return, which is directly linked to Unrwa's existence, that is the largest perpetuator of the Arab-Israeli conflict. Because by giving up the right of return, or saying that we no longer right of return, and basically arguing that Unrwa no longer needs to exist, you're basically saying I'm no longer a Palestinian, given the fact that Palestinian identity is so entrenched in the idea of being a refugee. So if we are concerned about a functioning Palestinian state to be, if we are concerned about creating a two-state solution, we should be talking about the fact that we need to wean Palestinian society off of Unrwa services and work towards creating an actual functioning state that would actually serve Palestinians and work with them to actually build functioning institutions and not work towards perpetuating a right of return that is never going to come to fruition. Thank you.
Thank you, both. Listening to both of you, hearing about some of the structural issues with Unrwa, other issues, it just, the question arises, if this is the case, if what you're saying is happening, why have the Israelis been cooperating with UNRWA for the past 65 years, and why do they continue to?
So the main organization that has asked basically to work with UNRWA over the decades has been the Ministry of Defense. And the Ministry of Defense, by definition, does not understand ideas. The Ministry of Defense is interested in physical defense issues. And as far as it's concerned, let's talk about it now. If in Gaza there's an organization that has the letters UN in it, that is providing schooling and so forth to Palestinians, and it's not Hamas, that's the only thing that the Ministry of Defense cares about. Literally, that's what they told me. They say, everything you're going to tell me about UNRWA is true. I can tell you worse. They're not Hamas. That's all we care about. So as far as the Ministry of Defense is concerned, they're looking at the very immediate issue. There's an organization in Gaza that is not Hamas. That's all we care about. The Ministry of Defense is not able to, not interested, not able, it's not how it thinks, to discuss or to notice that, okay, maybe in the short term, UNRWA is not Hamas, but in the long term, I would argue that it creates even greater damage to the possibility of peace by perpetuating this refugee status through the generation. By telling people who are clearly living in their own place that they're not living in their own place, and that their lives should be devoted to the destruction of another country. This is not how the Ministry of Defense is able to think, and as a result, it tends to marginalize and not really consider this issue. So this is why in the past, many people in the past decades have wanted to raise the issue of UNRWA. They've noticed how detrimental it is to the cause of peace and resolution and reconciliation. But it is the Ministry of Defense of Israel that has always said, don't touch them. You know, there are worse devils, so don't touch them. And the work that I did within Israel is to actually work with the Ministry of Defense to come to terms with what they can live with. And what they can live with is the continued provision of services. They want the continued provision of services, but they don't mind if we engage in the battle of ideas. If we begin to expose the fact that out of the 5 million, only tens of thousands are refugees, and the others are descendants who are looking at it more as an identity rather than a real status or need. So the issue really is to delink the question of funding. As I said, if the American taxpayer, if the European taxpayer wants to fund Palestinian schools, they're more than happy to, even though I agree they probably should do it through the Palestinian Authority. But there's absolutely no need to create new refugees in order to give this assistance. If someone needs assistance, give them the assistance. What does it matter that 5 generations ago, their great-great-grandparents fled from what is today Israel? There should be absolutely no connection. And this is why it's been very difficult to push this issue, because there's always been this mix of funding and the politics and the ideology. And what I'm trying to do is to separate the funding so that no one goes up in arms and say, oh no, we're going to not fund people who need it, but separate the funding for true need from the political program of perpetuating the conflict. And in truth, everyone's talking about the delegitimizing Israel. This is the greatest project of delegitimizing Israel in history. And it's been going on for decades, because the mere existence of descendants that are being kept as refugees in their status is to say Israel will never be legitimate. We don't accept the notion of partition. We don't accept the idea that the Jewish people have the right to And this is the core of the conflict. Sadly, today, there is still no Arab leader that is willing to accept the equal and legitimate claim of the Jewish people to sovereignty in their homeland. I'm not saying the greater claim, but at least an equal claim, a legitimate claim. None at all. And Unrwa is this tool of delegitimizing the notion of partition between a Jewish state and an Arab state. And the thing is that the defense establishment in general doesn't deal in ideas, and that's why for many, many decades it